Hello there and welcome. You have found the Fury Podcast, and my name is Zachariuki. Today, perhaps I thought of diving deep on what I would rather call the downfall of a social institution, so called marriage. I kind of wanted to share my 2 cents on the issue, how we arrived here, what we are doing, and perhaps what that says about the future, how we're going to walk in it as far as the institution is concerned. And I want to start off by sharing a personal, so to speak, anecdote. The year must have been 2017, 2018. I think I was just done with my undergraduate. And I was handling my first project back home, not so far away from where I was brought up. It was a church project. And I remember there was this one time we were doing some excavations. Of course, we were laying the foundation for the church project. And we got to a point where we no longer were dealing with red soil, but rather, you can tell it was sort of manure-ish, so to speak. I remember we got to this one section where we started digging out bones. It was like a whole stretch, just like in line. It was in line. It was just bones, piled up, and you can tell these were human bones. And I remember we got really curious, and there was this one, there was another fellow, who passed by. He was actually my neighbor, Peter, and I remember we were very curious about what that was about. And I remember it was him now explaining what that was about. Anyway, he gets to tell us that apparently that was one of the trenches that was used by the Mau Mau rebellion, to hide. These were the natives who were protecting the land, against now the foreigners, the British who had occupied, or rather who were trying to invade. I mean, this was just part of the rebellion, that they would dig out these big trenches, and that was just perhaps one of the defense or strategies, just how they were fighting. And so the bones that we were digging out was evidence enough that, there were a lot of people who had died there, perhaps were killed. Definitely, I mean, they were killed, or perhaps just died there. Who knows what reasons those were. I mean, think about it, not so far away. We just got our independence in 1963. We're in 2023, right? Those are just 6 decades ago. And here we are building a church on bones. We are literally stepping on people's or ancestors' blood. I mean, we rarely think about it, we it's weird, if you think about, how long ago we've been around, if you think about your ancestors, they have successfully, reproduced to arrive at you. But we never, I guess, take a moment to just think what it took to arrive here. I mean, hardly do you ever think about the fact that you're actually stepping on people's blood, when you're going to get your McDonald's, or when you're going to get your, KFC, or even when you're worshiping, on now the new built church. There were bones of people who were there, who fought, for whatever cause. And just made me think that is history, not so long ago. That was 6 decades ago, 60 years. And here I am, enjoying air conditioning. We're sipping some damn good whiskey in between the rocks, right? Never think about the history that much. But that's not even what this podcast is really about, the struggle that perhaps, the humans that came before us had to endure. It's more about how you read history. How do you read such history? And on a sort of, try to make a case of how perhaps a one unidimensional reading of history can be detrimental to our forging our way ahead into the future. Now, Nietzsche had this thing, he announced that the God was dead, and we are the one who had killed God, and we will never, wash away the blood that will result from that. The fact that being that, we've created, we've become gods of ourselves. We have, made significant strides, in science, and we've been able to explore the different planets, the universe. So we feel like, we have the power in our hands, and who is to say, what the utility of this God is. But again, this is not about, God being dead, but rather how, social institutions, family died, at the hands of very interesting ideas. And of course, I don't want to lay claim on, what feminism did, or how is it that we arrived here. But it's important to think about, even technology, just how it changed, to the fact that, now we have to deal with single parenthood being the new norm, for everyone. And the interesting thing about these such social experiments is that no one knows where it leads. Like, who knows, fatherlessness at large scale? Where does it arrive at? Does it arrive as at? No one really knows exactly, because we are in the experiment right now. And I started by sharing that personal anecdote about, us, uh, excavating these bones as we were laying the foundation for this church. Perhaps make a case that, how exactly do you read such history in as far as the genders are concerned, men and women? Do you sit back and say the society that we've lived in, before, the society that, our ancestors lived in, was male dominated and they were dominating over women? It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this was a point in time where both men and women, under the harshest of conditions, were trying to survive against the enemy. They had a common enemy for sure. So then, fast forward, to 3 decades later or 4 decades, looking back and reading that kind of history and saying that men and women weren't necessarily cooperating, but men were perhaps taking the lead in this and just dominating over everyone, seems a bit unidimensional, and it's detrimental if you take that, so to speak, logical argument to its logical end. And I never really got interested in this sort of thing, and until I heard Jordan Peterson talk about it, and it would appear it's a very dominant philosophy, especially in the Western world, where, so to speak, these first world countries have made significant strides in trying to equalize the society, so to speak, achieve egalitarian societies where men and women are alike. And of course, there's a lot of championing by the women's society, so to speak, the feminist movement. We try to make the case that, this has been our past and we don't necessarily have to walk into the future the way it was, being male dominated and all. But anyway, the point that he makes, or the point that he argues for, is that is a very risky thing to think about the future in that unidimensional way. In that, all that groups compete for is power and dominance. And, the group that emerged victorious is one that gets dominated over the other. Now, in the case of the genders, that men have done that so for the longest, and they have dominated over women. And you can see this sort of agenda being pushed, again, by the feminists, the hardcore ones. But was it really the case? Is the real question. Have men, since immemorial, dominated over everyone? Was it this patriarchy? And to be honest with you, I don't know. I mean, to some extent, I think, we've come a long way. I don't think we should live in societies where, especially like women, are not allowed to vote. I think we've really made significant strides towards making sure that that is not the case. And there's a lot to celebrate for that. Because I think for any society, you should try to structure it in a way that you exhaust the genius in everyone: men, women, children. Now, it's not to say that, there is no such thing as structural, systematic, maybe discrimination on the side of genders, but it's not so obvious what we should do about those sort of things. It's not so obvious. Like, what do we do about, women looking all hot, and wearing makeup, and, at workplaces, and just, lighting up their cheeks and just wearing heels? Now, from a male perspective, perhaps that can be read as very inviting, but well, they're not supposed to act on that impulse. And so, one of the things you kind of realize in some of these societies that who have, you know, managed to put a dictator, in lead and just try to. One of the things you realize about these societies where, uh, like Mao's in China or even with Hitler, it was very important that what the kids were taught at school was in line with the ideology that, let's say, so to speak, the men who are leading or fighting for. And the point is that, everything that is taught in college, it's only a matter of time before that whole thing spreads out in society later on when they finish. Ideas, they do spread. And so take a thing such as men dominating women, in the past. And you have all these uh, female activist groups, speaking a lot into it and saying just how is it that you can change that sort of thing, moving on forward. And I don't know exactly when the feminist movement, hit the scene, but it would appear to me that, maybe after the Second World War, perhaps in the 70s, perhaps that is when, these sort of ideas were pushed the hardest. And that is where perhaps you had the first lot of women who were perhaps, more career obsessed than the previous, and saying that, we can do it just as the men can, and even better. And who is to say, that is something to be celebrated. But one of the things that perhaps seems to have happened was that was at the cost of, or we had to sacrifice the family unit for that to happen. In that, you had a lot of women perhaps in society who put, careers first and never considered perhaps seriously the family aspect. And like I've said, these ideas, who knows how they spread. And of course, this is very important that also mention about the pill or the technology itself. The fact that, for once in human history, women are all able to control their sexuality. And so they were able to join the workforce. Unlike in the previous decades, millennia. And this allowed them to compete, of course, because, I mean, it's biology 101. Women do take a hit, doing child rearing, and they have to be out of the workplace. And you know, who knows what to do about these sort of things? They just happens. That is just what happens. And so you have the first group, second group, maybe a generation of women saying that, well, this was the case, of course, influenced by the feminist movements. And of course, the pill technology as it is, also did perhaps fuel, acted as a catalyst in this sort of transition. And so we arrived at a point where in society, a social institution such as family, which did play a very fundamental role in the previous past, is not perhaps as emphasized and perhaps is even fought. No one necessarily wants to commit. Now, what is interesting about this sort of thing is that, these are just complex adaptive systems. Everything is interacting with everything. Because, like, even in the previous past, you never had such a thing as instantaneous communication. The mere fact that you can actually go on Tinder and just swipe right to I don't know how many mates, potential mates. These are all things that play into the scene. Now, perhaps people don't feel the urge to just settle for one person. It's a never ending spiral of the next and the next. And that has been a veil to us because you can be here and you're matching with someone in, TZ. My father didn't have that problem. We're living the one of abundance where perhaps even running away from the society kind of makes sense. To an extent, you have to become ascetic to survive in it. Give up the idea that, your potential mate is somewhere out there in the distance and, paying attention to what you have at the moment. But again, the technology, that becomes rather hard because you can just keep, moving on to the next and the next. All things are just factors that are playing into what now we call, modern dating scene and just how we approaching relationships and marriage and how the social institution, the family, is under siege. what to do about it. Who is to say? But the interesting time, but the forces of evolution are still with us. You either evolve or you die. And as a people, as a civilization, as a species, we are very adaptive. We adapt to the new condition, and these are the new condition. But still, there's something very sick and very weird about a society where men and women treat each other as if they are competing, other than people who are collaborating to make it out of this. As we enjoy our free trip around the sun, we are trying to make it out of this, together. And so having all these two forces, the two genders, treat each other as if they are competing against each other other than cooperating, it's a very weird thing. Very weird. Like those bones, who is to say? Perhaps those were men who bones who were excavating. But imagine, the women were having hard times too, back at home taking care of their families. But nonetheless, they made it through under the harshest of conditions. But this seems like a Mexican standoff. Here we are, the two genders at each other's throat. You make the first move. No, you make the first move. But there's no denying the fact that, even such a thing as the sexual freedom that is there right now, it's affecting both, or not even affecting, but hurting both men and women. We are in new territory. This is not how things were. And I've said evolution is very important in this. You have to adapt, right? But nonetheless, it's an important conversation to have. What is marriage good for? Such an institution that was set up. Do we just carelessly denigrate it? Of what use was it? In my estimation, it would appear that it is good for the kids. But we'll never know since we are still in the social experiment. Who knows where we arrive at? We are in the experiment right now. The Mexican standoff. See you. Enjoy your day.